Shut the door.
Hello, everyone. It's Brad Jones with the Shannon Jones Team at Keller Williams Realty, and here with Phil Atwan with Exchange Resources, and wanted to go through a little bit about 1031 exchanges, kind of a rough overview, if you will, and then maybe touch on some subjects that might be pandemic related, just to see if there's been anything recently that has impacted people's ability to do exchanges. Phil, if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do and what your company is, and then we'll get into some questions.
Thanks, Brad. I'm Phil Atwan with Exchange Resources. I specialize in the 1031 tax-deferred exchange. We do this nationally. My clients are all over the country. We open lots of exchanges every day all over the U.S. I speak at about 150 seminars to the real estate community, to the escrow community, to the CPA community, and to the bar. Not this one, but the ones who think they legally know something about real estate.
Okay.
And we give them continuing education in that area. And that's what I spend most of my time doing. So,
okay.
Yeah.
You're going to be a great resource for us because I think a lot of our clients have taken advantage of the really strong real estate market over the past few years. And even this year, surprisingly, given our pandemic, it's still been a very strong year. So a lot of people have maybe made their first foray into, income property. And now maybe they've held it for a few years and they're thinking, hey, I have some equity here. What can I do with this? So let's just kind of touch on that. What is a 1031 exchange and how does that work?
Brad, there are three reasons why investors buy investment real estate: income, appreciation, and tax write-offs. Though that's the motivating drive.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when properties begin to appreciate over time? If you've had your property for 7, 10, 12, 15 years, it's worth more than what you paid for it. That equity grows. But the question is, what is that equity producing in terms of return when you consider the rent you're collecting versus the expenses on the property? The answer is it gives you what they call a rate of return. The higher the equity goes, the lower your actual rate of return is, because a lower equity could still charge the same amount of rent for the identical property on the same street. So what many investors do, they re-leverage the equity to have more front doors that are going to pay them rent on a monthly basis. And when appreciation happens, now they're appreciating with multiple doors or multiple properties instead of just being equity heavy in one. And then ultimately, you have more appreciation because you've got more properties to inflate with. Mm-hmm. You have more doors that are paying you rent, and you have more doors that are actually giving you additional depreciation. What the 1031 exchange allows you to do is to sell the property to re-leverage the equity and not pay the capital gains tax. Because every time you sell a piece of property today, and we know in the future, we can talk about that a little later, with the new incoming administration, they want even more taxes on the rent that you collect. They want to raise that. Mm-hmm. You also have to pay the healthcare program when you sell a piece of property, an additional tax. You have to pay the federal government of what they call a recapture depreciation tax. So whether you took the tax write-off or not, they still charge you a tax when you sell the property for the allowable depreciation. And then lastly, the state of California, which is talking about 3% increase in income tax. They're going from a high of 13.3 all the way up to approximately 16. And they're on the verge of approving that and making it retroactive to January 1st of this year, 2020. Okay. So, those are huge numbers that an investor has to pay. The exchange allows you to literally defer all that capital gains tax, all the state taxes, to buy better properties that allow you to re-leverage for income, appreciation, and tax write-offs. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, growing your portfolio a little
Absolutely. Making your portfolio work for you so you don't have to.
Right. And then later on, when you're maybe not working as much, you're wanting to scale back, you'll have income producing properties, multiple streams of income. So that's all great. Yeah.
And
So
that's when you decide at that point in your life, and your hair is this color, that if you want to start retiring or thinking about that, you can
yeah,
begin to start paying those properties off. Yes, there's more equity in there now, but you get actually higher cash flow at that point because you don't need to releverage anymore. You're just looking for the income so you can live your life for the rest of your
exactly,
years. Yeah.
exactly. So the process for selling a property through a 1031 exchange has to be done through an approved company like yours, Exchange Resources. So just kind of define what is a qualified intermediary.
It's kind of an IRS name. If you go to the irs.gov and look into the website regarding the 1031 exchange, they're going to require that you use a qualified intermediary. On the street, we call it accommodator.
Okay.
Some people call it facilitators, straw people. There's 101 names, that they call us. But the bottom line is it's all the same thing. It's a company that's set up to, number one, do the documents while you're in escrow, to take the first step of completing the exchange. Second thing, Brad, we hold the funds in between escrow because the client is not allowed to touch the funds or it becomes taxable. And number three, we handle the acquisition with the new replacement property escrow. We set up the documents there, and then we wire all the money into the acquisition. And now the client has done a trade. They sold what they used to have. They've releveraged into one or multiple properties, and they'll let you exchange into anywhere in the country. So if you think that you want to go out of state, like 23% of my client base is doing right now, and they're looking at other states that are a lot more tax friendly and a lot more builder friendly, what happens ultimately, you can go into other places and diversify your portfolio to the way you want it to look, to the kinds of properties you want. You don't have to stay in the same property you're in. As long as it's investment or business use, you can go into other types of properties, which is great. So you can go into a triple net property and have a Starbucks or Walgreens property who's your tenant, and not have to deal with the day-to-day, hassle of managing properties. So there's lots of reasons why investors can move into different types of properties, and the federal government approves that.
And what you just mentioned was one of my questions I had coming up. Well, it was great. It's a great lead into it, because the like kind property, correct me if I'm saying it wrong, but it just has to be an income producing property. It can't be your primary residence, but it can be an income producing property. So you said triple net. For somebody who's not an experienced investor, that's a commercial property where you're really the tenant is taking on all of the burden of the rent, the utilities, everything.
Yeah, maintenance of the property,
Maintenance.
the property taxes they pay for, the insurance on the building they pay for, depending on how you structure that triple net lease. But that's why it's called triple net. So the tenant it's less expensive for them to do it this way than buying property, because now all their profits are going into real estate as opposed to lining the shelves with the product that they sell. And those are great properties to go into. And the beautiful thing, you can buy one in Texas, or you can buy one in Arizona, you can buy one in Charlotte, North Carolina. The bottom line is you can get it anywhere because you don't have to constantly visit it and collect rent. And their job is to maintain it.
Right.
And those are reputable companies. Those are companies that cannot get their credit dinged because they're not doing their job in their agreement of this property that they're leasing. So it's a win-win for the company, and it's a win-win for the investor.
And we'll hold that thought a little bit, because I want to come back to some of our current market conditions at the end here. But the first steps for, if somebody has a property and they're thinking, okay, now I'd like to re-leverage and grow my portfolio, whether it's with another residential income property or commercial, what are the first steps that somebody needs to take when choosing to do a 1031 exchange?
I think the first thing they need to take is talk with you or Shannon. I mean, the bottom line is you need an experienced real estate agent who has an understanding on how the 1031 exchange works, how to bring in the right people who know how to facilitate it and can do this nationally, that can offer them security for their funds in between escrow so their money's protected, and ultimately put everything right, where we have an internal legal department. We would actually speak with their tax people if they need some help in this area. It's our pleasure to do that. It's all included in the fee.
That's an excellent resource for people to take advantage of. And so when somebody starts into this process, they've decided I want to sell a property, they've contacted a realtor, hopefully somebody like us, and they say, okay, well, what do I do first? There's some timelines involved.
Right.
Timelines involved in identifying a property, and there's a timeline involved in closing the deal, if you will.
There are three basic types. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
No, good. That's why
There are three basic types of ways of doing this. Number one is to close the sale and the purchase on a concurrent or simultaneous basis. Most people don't do that. The second one is which most people do choose. It's called a delayed exchange, and you were just alluding to it. Once the sale closes, you have 180 days, which is a little less than 6 months, to close escrow on whatever you want to buy, as long as it's investment real estate anywhere in the country. Number two, the first 45 days are deemed to name the qualified properties or the pool of properties you're going to acquire from. You can have up to 3 properties on that list. You can buy any one of the 3, 2 of the 3, or all 3 if you want to diversify and go into different properties in different places. But the bottom line is you have the first 45 days to finalize that after the sale closes. You know what that tells me, Brad?
What's that?
It tells me that, number one, I should be looking for replacement property before I even, or at least by the time I list the property, no later than that. Why? Because the key to the exchange isn't really selling. It's what I'm going to exchange into that's going to be better for me and for my future income and appreciation and tax write-offs. So I want to know what the market looks like by spending time. You know, they teach a bank teller to recognize a counterfeit from the real thing by having them not looking at the money, but actually touching it. And the more they touch the real thing, they can spot a counterfeit just by virtue of the fact that it feels different. The same is kind of true if you think about it. The more you're familiar with the marketplace, the more they talk to people like you who understand what the marketplace looks like and what might be different ways to increase their cap rates, to increase their income, then now they can look at what's available, what types of properties are more suited to their lifestyle and what they want to go into, and then be able to accept an offer, be making offers on new properties, and not worry about the 45 days to identify. Because why on earth would you want to wake up the day your sale is closing and say, I better find a new property, I've only got 45 days to do it? Folks, you're doing this because you want to grow your income, not because you want to fall into something, but you have to be very deliberate to find the right property that you think is going to be best for you.
Yeah, you don't want to have that pressure of, oh my gosh, I need to find something that will work. You want to find the best property that will work. And if you work with a experienced realtor and they're helping you, they could help you identify maybe a cooperative seller who might be doing the same thing that
Absolutely.
you're doing. And you know, that person who has an 8-unit building and you're selling a 4-unit building, maybe that it's time for them to move up to a larger property or more of the same type of properties, and they will understand what you're doing as a buyer of their property, and they'll be very cooperative. But you have to communicate up front.
Yeah, and that's where people like you come in, that you're able to help them do that. And that's such a significant, intricate part of this process of selling and buying, going into the right properties. The third kind of exchange, we first mentioned simultaneous closings, and we mentioned the delayed closing up to 180 days later, which is a little less than 6 months, with a 45-day window to identify. The third one is it intrigues me. To me, it's the best exchange that's out there. It's called the reverse exchange. Yeah. The reverse exchange allows you to wait. Keep looking until you find something. And then when you find the right property, you jump on it. Why? Because the federal government now allows you to close a purchase first through this reverse exchange and then close the sale. As with any exchange, like the qualified intermediary has to be involved in every single escrow, the purchase escrow and the sale escrow, or escrows, because it could be plural. So the bottom line is that through us, we can acquire they would fund, either they would have a swing loan or bridge loan, a line of credit, hard money, whatever, some kind of fund, or pay all cash for the right property at the right location at the right price, and then close the sale up to 180 days later. You can literally do it backwards. That takes the sweat out of it. In a market like this, it's easy to sell, but it's consequently you become a buyer and it's harder to find the replacement properties. That's why a lot of investors enjoy the reverse exchange. It costs more, but my big question is, how much is your real estate worth? How much is your income worth? Well, how much is your appreciation worth? Don't you want to go into the right property, make sure you've got the right one? And if you find the right one, then do the reverse exchange. If not, go with the delayed method. Delayed will cost you less money, but the reverse, you can't let the opportunity go by, or you really, that's the big fish that got away kind of a story. So you want to make sure you get the right property.
And it's a little more peace of mind as well, because now you know you're getting the property you really want on your upleg purchase. And then you have the freedom to sell your property with 180 days to do so. And now that pressure is off of you. It's like buying, moving up to your next house. If you're able to buy your next house without selling your current house, hey, I'm going to have a little comfort level knowing I know where I'm going to go. Here, with reverse exchange, you know where you're going to go, and then you can sell. Which is great.
There are three words I've been taught: deliberate, on purpose, and intentional. I think all three really make sense when you're spending that much of your money for your future income. And it isn't just your future income and appreciation. You're going to give this to your heirs. You're going to give it to them when you pass away. So why not put it into the right properties? And if you find something later, you can do another exchange. The government will let you do it again. So it's just a wonderful process. And we love it. I've been doing it for 22 years. Prior to that, I was in title insurance, so I pretty much understand the real estate background and how the transaction works and the different facets of it, whether it's a lender or the escrow or the real estate people or whatever. So the bottom line is that this is a great business to be in. The properties work for you. They produce income. And the last time I checked, I don't see rents going down, my friend. I mean, they're yelling and screaming about rent control, and it's not because they're going down. It's because there's demand. So you get built-in increases from your income. So that's a great thing too. So,
is there a way to do a partial exchange? Do you have to invest all of your money?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask me that. I just got off a call a few minutes ago where the client needs to pay off some credit cards or bills or in their particular situation, and they were wondering, is there any way I can keep $40 or $45 or $50,000 and still do the 1031 exchange? And the answer is yes. And you said it's called a partial exchange. That's when you let us know how much you're going to need to keep, so we can set up the exchange for the entire sale except the portion of cash that you need. And then you will pay taxes on the money you keep, which is fair, but the rest of your burden is tax deferred on the sale of that property, which is great. So as long as you're willing and check with your CPA to find out what the hit would be, make sure you probably take a little more so you can pay the taxes on it, but the cash that's also coming out of it. But the bottom line is it's very doable, and not a lot, but a number of our clients do that, and they find solace in it because they're accomplishing, how's that old two birds with one stone kind of thing? So,
right. Yeah. And in today's economy, there's a lot of people that are, struggling a little bit, but they might have been doing very well before. And now they might have a piece of property that something like that would work for. That could help them over, get them over the next few months until our pandemic is in retreat, if you will, and vaccines are available and maybe the economy, is a little more stable. So people can take advantage of some of the properties that they own. So we've talked about the partial exchange, the reverse exchange, the types of properties. We mentioned it a little bit. What properties do and don't qualify for a 1031 exchange? And you touched on it before, but what properties don't qualify for an exchange?
Brad, that's a great question. And here's the answer. Your principal residence, your second home, your vacation home, or your business. Basically, the property that the business is in does qualify. It's the business itself, the goodwill of the business, the inventory of the business, the equipment of the business. That does not. So if I have all this stuff in a restaurant and I own the building, I could do an exchange on the building, but not on the actual business itself.
Okay.
Yeah, but a second home and a vacation home. If we've got a rental, one in Signal Hill, we've got another one right next door to it in Long Beach, and guess what? I can't be living in there, for when we go on vacation. That isn't what the government is entitled for the exchange. They've only allowed the exchange for rental or investment. Technically, and I don't know if your listeners are even aware of this, and they can double check with their CPA, the government will actually allow you to spend 14 days a year or 10% of the time that your property is rented for personal use, as long as you don't utilize it for more than that, and the government will permit that to happen, which is pretty cool. So they can check with their CPAs to verify that.
Yeah.
But this is the bottom line. It can't be your retreat home in the mountains or at the beach or in the desert. It has to be shown on your tax return as an investment. Most people don't know this, Brad, but people self-incriminate themselves by filling out a tax return. And when they don't show that there's income on the property and they're not depreciating it, that means it's not an investment property. That means it's a second home. And guess what? And they decide to do an exchange on it, the government's going to say, wait a minute, you haven't been reporting that this way for all these years. How is it that you feel that you can do a 1031 exchange? And that's why talking with somebody like you and their tax people will be very, very helpful, because now they can position their properties to declare rent and whatnot for a good 2 years. Now they're in the position to do a 1031 tax deferred exchange into other investment property.
All right. So those timelines you mentioned, whether you're doing a regular exchange or a reverse exchange, the 45 days to identify a property and 180 days to close. What happens if you miss the deadline? What happens if you didn't identify, or you identified 3 properties perhaps, and you weren't successful on purchasing any of those? Now, what happens when you run out of 45 days?
Yeah. Well, pretty much they put you in the electric chair. No, I'm just kidding. No, but to some that feels that way. You go back and pay the taxes. That's just all. Yeah. There's no fines. There's no penalties. You did the best you could. You just couldn't make it happen, and you didn't want to buy the wrong property. So therefore, you pay the taxes and move on. And that's the worst case scenario. Does it happen? It does. Does it happen a lot? Not really. I mean, based on my book of business that I work with, I really don't see more than 15% failure rate. That means you have an 85% success rate for the most part.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
The reverse exchange would seem to me at
Fix it.
first glance to be the best solution.
Absolutely.
For a lot of people, more expensive on a administrative level to pay the cost of the exchange, but being able to guarantee yourself, okay, I will have my up-leg property, and then selling your property is a lot easier than acquiring the next one under timelines that you may or may not be able to meet.
That's exactly right, especially in a marketplace that we're in today, where inventory, honestly, when's the last time we had an abundance of inventory? I think it was about 12 years ago when we had the foreclosure market and the short sale market, and those were still going pretty quickly. I've not seen a lot of inventory, and frankly, from what I'm understanding, it doesn't look that way in the future either. There's too many restrictions on building and whatnot, and I think the seller's in control, and that's why the reverse exchange, I think, is a really good way to go.
And it's a very competitive market out there right now. There's a lot of people doing exactly what we're talking about. And so when a quality property comes on the market that shows some potential for income or potential to add some value to the property, those are very attractive. So a lot of times it's competitive to get those properties. So that's where we could come in and help evaluate the return on your investment, the price, the right price to pay, and so forth.
Exactly.
Have you seen any, getting into our current market with the pandemic, COVID-19,
Right.
I think we traded messages earlier. There were some delays. There were some allowable extra time due to that earlier, but not so much anymore. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Brad, what's happened is the federal government back in, I think it was April, created some extension time that went all the way through July 15th. They extended the 45 days, or they extended the 180 days to close. They wouldn't do both, but they did because of COVID. That is long gone. We're in December. So the bottom line is that I don't foresee the government making an additional extension. It's possible, but not likely at this point.
All right. And I talk to a lot of people, investors or people thinking of investing, and they're having, I will say, some second thoughts a little bit based on our current market and the discussions of rent control and rent forbearance, where somebody can't pay their rent,
Right.
and people are rightfully looking into this a little bit more and concerned about what happens if I get into a residential income property and my tenants can't pay the bills, can't pay.
That's a real problem. I mean, look, I've seen two things happen. I've seen tenants take it a little farther than they wanted to go. I actually have a client who's a title rep, and what he did is his tenant quit paying him. Well, he went to find out after doing some research that the tenant was claiming COVID, but he actually got promoted and he got a raise. Wow. But he decided to utilize that as an excuse. Now, I'm not saying there aren't real hardships out there. There are. I mean, you could just look at the unemployment numbers and whatnot. This COVID has really caused a lot of havoc. The country was doing great until this COVID thing hit. But here's the deal, is that there are issues. Good times happen, bad times happen. Cycles of winter and then spring and summer come around, but then the fall and winter come back again. So that's just part of the storm of any kind of investment, of anything that you're going to own, because it's not a perfect world that we live in. But having explained what you did, honestly, I just don't know of a better investment where if you are done with residential, you can get out of it and go into some other sector of investment property. Storage facilities. You know how many people want to put their garbage in storage? I mean, why are they hanging on to it and making the payments? But these things are in demand. There's so many different types of properties they can acquire in a 1031 exchange. Residential is a huge market, but it's not the only one.
And what you just mentioned is an alternative for somebody who might be looking at, okay, well, I want to get out of residential because I'm concerned. I don't know how long it's going to take for that market to recover and people to get their jobs back. Storage facilities would be great because some of the other options, retail, strip centers, the triple net stuff, some of those mom and pop businesses are having troubles too. Sure. Something like a storage facility or something that isn't retail based, restaurant based, or residential is still an option for people.
Absolutely. And people seem to, in bad times, need storage more than good times. Because in good times they can just buy a bigger place or rent a bigger place. But in tough times they need to do something with their stuff and they're emotionally attached to it. So what do? They pay somebody to store their junk. So it just is what it is. But I got to tell you, there's one more facet of this.
Yeah.
It's called a DST, a Delaware Statutory Trust. It allows an investor to co-own on a CVS or a Starbucks or, a large retail place that has a lot of anchored good tenants in there, where maybe they're at the point in their 70s and their 80s and they don't want to manage anymore. They just want as much cash flow as they can get. You can sell their properties. They can go into a DST, co-own, and go into a very, very nice property they would no way be able to afford just by themselves. And it gives them that option to up their cash flow and still maintain their principal. So, and when they pass, it goes to the kids.
And that's a little bit more hands-off kind of property because you're not having to manage tenants and so forth. There's a manager for that type of property.
That's right.
Yep.
And all that is included. And that includes with your rate of return. You'll still get about a 5% return. What can you get here in Southern California? That's a 5% return. That's a pretty big nut to crack. And that's the beauty of other markets. There are so many emerging markets in the U.S. because of California and New York. People are just done with these types of states, and they're looking for other areas that are where people are beginning to flock to. Maybe you and I may not live, in the South or something like that, but Georgia's going nuts. There's just so many different states that are. Florida's going crazy, and people opt to live there because they can get jobs. They're more friendly to work. The rents are less. Technically, you could actually get a higher return there. It's hard to believe, but it's true as an investor. But there's just so many different emerging markets that you can invest into, just like what we were, 30, 40 years ago. So maybe 50. I've got a few years behind me, so I remember those days. You know what, by the way, what the biggest regret an investor has, Brad?
What is that?
They didn't buy. Because now the market has become so much more expensive. And what they could have gone into now, all the equity they could have had, the increased incomes. But woulda, shoulda, I remember when I bought my first house for $76,000. I bought it all the way out in the city of Glendora. My parents thought I was out of our minds when we bought that property. But guess what? A year and a half later, I sold it for $96,000. And I said, you can really make money at owning this stuff called real estate. And honestly, of all the wealthy people I know, how many of them own investment real estate in their portfolio?
Almost everybody.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
All right. Anything I didn't bring up? Any other questions that you get on a occasional or regular basis that we didn't talk about so far?
Yeah. I just got a call today, just a couple hours ago. And this guy owns this property. It's a big commercial property. It's about $6 million. And he owns it in an LLC. But his parents, who are the other shareholders of the LLC, want to cash out. So they want to sell the property, but he wants to exchange. And he would call me up and say, he called me up and said, Phil, can I exchange my portion? And the answer is no, because you don't own the property. The LLC owns the property. Therefore, the LLC has to do the 1031 exchange, or you can buy out your parents' share of their LLC shares. So there's lots of these technical things that we're just kind of scanning the basics here.
Yeah.
The related party rules. There's cash and debt rules. There's just a lot of different things that the federal government imposes on us that I'd be happy to get into in a part 2 if you'd like, and we can get into dive into those. But most people don't have those types of questions. They have a lot of the basic ones that what you just brought out today, and if they would just think about those items and think about how much equity there's in their building and what is the rate of return when you consider the income that you're charging, when you consider the expenses to the property based on the equity that's invested in it. I've got a little formula that I can send to you that you can give to your clients or your prospective clients that shows you what your rate of return is. Share it with your CPA. Let them take a look at it. You'd be surprised if the higher the equity, the lower the rate of return, because the equity doesn't allow you to charge more rent. Yeah. So the rate of return goes down. And it's called releveraging. And I think you brought a lot of this out today. And I think if an investor would just think about that, see what's out there in the marketplace, talk with you, ultimately what will happen is it'll create a new idea of maybe I can actually releverage a little bit and do a lot better for myself.
And that we'll kind of wrap up on that note and just say that if somebody's considering doing an exchange, if they're exchanging or considering moving up to a larger property or another type of property, get us involved early. Talk to us as your realtors, talk to Phil as your accommodator, and we can answer your questions up front. And then as you're moving forward, you'll know you're doing the right thing. You know, you have a plan to follow, and you won't make one of those mistakes that can cause you to not be able to take advantage of the tax deferral.
You know, I get 2 calls a week, every week, saying I need you to set up an exchange. And I say, sure, just give me the name of the escrow officer and we'll get it all set up. They said, but escrow closed yesterday or it closed last week. There's nothing we can do anymore. It's a done deal. It's a taxable event. And the government
can do it if they're already in escrow.
That's not a problem when you're in escrow. It's after you're closed.
Yeah. They can let you know. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And there's no obligation to talk with somebody like me. We're delighted to answer the questions. Make sure so you can go back and talk to your tax counsel and make sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Phil, thank you very much.
Pleasure to be with you today, Brad. It really has
worked
been.
with Phil for a long time. My wife Shannon and I, we're based in Long Beach, but we work all over South LA, North Orange County. And like Phil said, if you have some property and you're thinking of selling and you're looking out of state, we can refer you to somebody out of state that could help you that specializes in a particular area. And Phil could still handle the exchange.
Nationwide.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Phil. We'll stay in touch. And if anybody has any questions or needs Phil's contact information, just reach out to us. We're happy to help.
Always a pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.